The weekly message of the United Church of Christ of Hummelstown, Pennsylvania, a podcast version of our worship service. To learn more and listen to the rest of the worship, check us out online at hummelstownucc.org.
As we came into the story of Ruth and Naomi last week, we continue and conclude that story this week. With their origins in the struggle and survival mode of migrant vulnerability, their stage was set. And this week, we conclude it with an ending of abundance, renewal, and integration into the community. To tell the story of Ruth and Naomi is to tell a story of women who use any means by which to survive and to make a way, out of no way, in a male-dominated society. These chapters address how they choose to navigate their dislocation, their invisibility, while faithfully seeking redemption in an imperfect world. But it takes work. And it takes thinking outside the bounds of expected society and the ability to define for themselves the borders to cross to follow a divine path. Yet even from their place of poverty and lost status, they remind us that redemption does indeed come to those who are poor, vulnerable, and excluded. And more than that, when the vulnerable are centered, raised up, and redeemed, a way is made for the salvation of God's people through the ages. When we hear the story of the widow that Jesus elevates as the significant giver above all those who have wealth, we connect this upside-down economy back to the same economy of surrender, trust, and investment in the people that's on display in his ancestor, Ruth and Naomi and Boaz. The fact that this outsider is so central to our tradition's genealogy encourages us to see this destabilizing force that subverts rigid constructions of identity and necessitates an ongoing openness to the other. God's reign begins with surrender in total trust of all that one has, one's vulnerable self-identity, or one's last two coins. Trust, support, and deep listening are still the tools that we are called to engage, to read Ruth and Mark's gospel, and live our own lives in this moment now. Trust, support, deep listening. This is what these texts are founded on, and what our faith tradition calls us to. As we work to align ourselves with God, we are called to extend a radical hospitality to strangers, as Naomi and Boaz offer here. And they both do so through some rather skillful maneuvering. Naomi, who knows the patterns of the men in harvest time and when to have Ruth present herself at the right time, to propose an alliance of marriage so that she will be more protected than just able to glean in the fields, as he's encouraged through her throughout the season. So Naomi uses her knowledge of the system to encourage an outcome that will benefit, to provide them food, more than just chicken nuggets, more than just a measure of barley, but to provide a way for their future. Boaz, too, knows just how to maneuver the situation, as he does when it is just him and a Ruth alone on the threshing floor. But more significantly, in his negotiation with this unnamed yet somehow more closely related kinsman. someone who had a closer connection to the land of Naomi's husband, and who might have been tasked with the job of providing for his widow and daughter-in-law. Scholars note that there doesn't seem to be a legal basis for the connection Boaz makes with the land and therefore the daughter-in-law, but no one seems to question it, not the witnesses nor the kinsmen. And through his understanding of the system, or his working of the system, he is able to provide his desired outcome for Ruth, and importantly, for Naomi, who is the one entitled to the redemption. He goes beyond legal requirements to protect not only Elimelech's patrimony, but also the women's welfare. And none of that would have been possible without Ruth's insistence, her choice to go with, that she was to be an agent for Naomi's salvation. Ruth, who when she knows she has nothing, chooses that time to care for others. What a role model for faithful engagement in hard times she presents. When you don't know what to do for yourself, seek to care for others. And caring for Naomi, she accomplishes by gleaning the fields to bring home sustenance. Following Naomi's plan with Boaz, marrying and bearing a child. All of these acts of her physical body. And they all show us how Ruth's use of her abilities is able to create a reversal of fortune. And maybe that we too are capable of reversing the fortunes of another. The book as a whole encourages us to see where unjust socioeconomic structures place women in a similar plight today, and asks us to find ways that we too can offer our best abilities to encourage their flourishing. Will we be open to hear what the work is for us, who are the widows, the refugees, the migrants, the vulnerable, all those who are outside our obligation to provide a means to renewal? We live with an overly simple cultural expectation of personal autonomy above interdependence, which discourages us to think of the neighbor. But our faith story in Ruth and Naomi and Boaz, just as in the story of the widow in the temple with Jesus, tell us that all are worthy of our best investment, personal and financial. When we hear the conclusion of the story, we see just how far the journey with Naomi has come. The focus on Naomi's fullness at the end is intended to remind us, to round out the expression of emptiness set up so poignantly at the start. Despite railing against God's bitter providence, or perhaps because she so courageously did so, Naomi returns center stage and is wholly reintegrated into her community with a new generation to provide for, and who will provide for her as well. She is restored. And in that reversal, it sounds a lot like the story of Job we spent several weeks on, navigating to a similar conclusion. And in both, railing against God is not a deal breaker. And that's another thing we can take away from this reading. Being angry about our situations, our personal and communal realities, is an acceptable reaction and prayer life with God. Being angry is not unfaithful. And our call as Christian community is to come together with our closest companions to seek fullness too, whatever the journey may bring. In Naomi's story, we're offered the opportunity to see fullness beyond her devastation. But it opens another door too. If Naomi is made whole, we can also ask, is Ruth? The story of hospitality and care of others that we have in Ruth is also a story that ends without her in it. At the close of the book, Naomi, not Ruth, is foregrounded, blessed, and celebrated. The women bless God concerning Naomi. They bless the baby. May his name be renowned in Israel. And they proclaim how the baby will bless Naomi. He will be a restorer of life and a nourisher of your old age. Throughout the proclamations of blessing and celebration, Ruth is nameless and is only mentioned passively as the one who bore Naomi's redeemer, as Naomi's daughter-in-law. who loves Naomi, is more loving than a bunch of sons would be. For all her strength, Ruth is seemingly marginally valued again. She has finally shed her status as the outsider, no longer Ruth the Moabite, but also not mentioned. So are we to think of this as a good thing? Or are we even to notice that she has been removed from the center of her own story? I don't know. She will be venerated in our tradition. We know, as we've mentioned, it is Ruth, not Naomi, that gets included in Jesus' genealogy. And so maybe that can tell us that the story will always go beyond the path of the future, and that we can never know just how impactful we are to others. But it also asks us to trust, to support, to deeply listen, to counter trends of physical and narrative erasure for our vulnerable members of our families, our communities, our society. It is important, the small moments. It is sometimes the small moments that need the most light shined upon it. And this is critical as we leave the story of Ruth. We must come out of her story looking for the unexpected story to come. For in the small interactions and the transitional moments, our faith is built up upon like mountains. In this week of the lectionary, when we pair the story of Ruth's renewal with the story of Jesus and the widow, we share a faith built on the small gifts we can offer. Presence, a few coins, insight into the hidden histories of vulnerable communities. Jesus said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all those who are contributing to the treasury. For all of them have contributed out of their abundance, but she out of her poverty, and has put in everything she had, all she had to live on." So this week, let us put our trust and support, all that we have, into the world today, so that we might seek solidarity for the flourishing of all. May we be willing like Ruth, and resourceful like Naomi, engaged like Boaz, and fully invested like the widow. May we praise with grateful hearts, and may we find the path that will lead us into interdependence. Amen.
This has been the weekly worship from the United Church of Christ of Hummelstown. No matter who you are, or where you are, on life's journey, you are welcome here. Join us online or in person, at 104 East Main Street in Hummelstown, Sundays at 10:30 a.m. Thank you for listening today. We look forward to your fellowship.